Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport buzzed with early morning energy, families rolling suitcases, pilots making last-minute checks, and the soft hum of climate control mingling with distant announcements. In the premium check-in line, a trio moved with quiet purpose. Dr. Nadine Ellis, 61, wore a tailored black coat over her simple blouse. Her silver hair was pulled back in an elegant twist, and her posture, shoulders back, chin level, spoke of a lifetime spent leading quietly but firmly. Beside her walked Charles Ellis, her husband of 35 years, steady and unflappable, and Eli, their brave 8-year-old grandson, whose bald head bore the unspoken story of his third round of chemotherapy. A uniformed agent glanced up as Nadine placed 3 first-class tickets on the counter. He studied her without meeting her eyes, then glanced at Eli's toy airplane dangling from the boy's hand. "Ma'am," he said, voice polite but tight, "are you sure these are first-class seats?" His tone carried a question larger than a misplaced ticket, one that weighed on skin color and circumstance rather than printed names. Nadine offered a gentle smile. She leaned forward, resting one hand on the counter. "My grandson needs to be in Washington by tomorrow morning for a bone marrow evaluation," she said softly. "We're flying first class so Eli can rest, and so our rounds don't get delayed." Her voice was calm, matter-of-fact, with not an ounce of heat, only a quiet insistence that this trip was about life and survival, not luxury. The agent hesitated, flicked his eyes to Charles, then back to Nadine. Charles cleared his throat and added, "Dr. Ellis is director of MedBridge Foundation. We fund pediatric cancer clinics at 17 airports nationwide. This flight matters." Nadine felt a flutter in her chest. Pride for her grandson, gratitude for her husband's support, and an uneasy sense that her reputation might speak louder than any badge or title. Minutes later, they stepped through security and into the departure lounge. Nadine inhaled deeply, tasting the faint scent of coffee and jet fuel. Beneath her calm exterior, a quiet determination glowed. She would protect her family at any cost. Today's journey was about more than a plane ride. It was the first step in defending both a child's life and the dignity so easily threatened by the slightest glance of doubt. They stepped down the jet bridge and into the hushed luxury of Nexair's first-class cabin. Plush leather seats gleamed under soft overhead lights, and a flight attendant offered pre-departure champagne to the first group of passengers. Nadine, Charles, and Eli moved quietly into row 1, taking their seats in 1A, 1B, and 1C. The cabin smelled faintly of eucalyptus-scented hand towels and fresh linens, a sharp contrast to the sterile white noise of the terminal. As the other passengers settled in, they received polite nods and warm smiles. A silver-hailed couple 2 rows ahead laughed softly and clinked glasses. A businessman glanced up from his tablet and returned a friendly greeting. But when Nadine lifted her gaze, there was no welcoming nod, no cursory "good morning, ladies and gentlemen." Only the back of a woman in a crisp uniform moving past them with brisk efficiency. That was Karen Whitlow, the lead flight attendant. Around 45, impeccably groomed, with her hair in a tight bun and posture so straight it could have been measured by a ruler. She paused at the cabin partition, clipboard in hand, her cold eyes sweeping the room. Yet when she reached Nadine's row, she made no eye contact, no gesture of hospitality. Instead, she turned away and offered a warm towel to the passenger in 1D. Eli looked up from his toy airplane and frowned. "Grandma, why didn't she smile at me?" Nadine gave him a small, reassuring squeeze. "Don't worry, sweetie. Sometimes people are rushing." But inside, her chest tightened. She felt the weight of that unspoken judgment, a silent question about why a grandmother, her husband, and a little boy could possibly belong in first class. Charles's jaw clenched. He stared straight ahead, but Nadine saw the tension in his shoulders. She laid a calm hand on his arm. Neither spoke aloud. They didn't need to. The message was clear enough without words. They weren't who Karen expected to see here. Minutes passed. Karen moved through the aisle, attending only to those she deemed worthy of her smile. Each time she reached their row, she looked past them, as if Nadine and her family were a mirage. No welcome drink, no courtesy check, just a stiff pivot and a return to guests in white shirts and designer scarves. Nadine closed her eyes for a moment, inhaling slowly. She reminded herself why they were here, for Eli. But the sting of disregard lingered like an unwelcome guest. Beneath her calm exterior, a slow-burning resolve began to glow. She would not let this silent slight go unanswered. A few minutes after takeoff, the cabin lights dimmed to the gentle glow reserved for a smooth climb. Nadine settled into her seat, Eli tucked against her side with his toy airplane in hand, and Charles closed his eyes for a brief nap. For a moment, everything felt as it should, peaceful, protected. Then, Karen Whitlow reappeared at the front of the cabin, clipboard in hand. Her crisp uniform looked almost military against the soft leather seats. She paused in the aisle, scanning the rows like a sergeant inspecting recruits. When her gaze landed on Nadine's family, she hesitated just long enough to make Nadine's skin prickle. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Karen said, voice neutral but carrying an edge. "I need to verify your seats, please." She extended the clipboard toward Nadine, eyes flicking over the form without warmth. Nadine glanced at Charles, who sat rigid and alert beside her, then turned to meet Karen's gaze. "Of course," Nadine replied, voice even. She unzipped her bag, withdrew the 3 first-class tickets, and handed them over. Karen took the tickets with clipped movements. No smile, no thank you. She studied the printed names and seat assignments as though reading a confidential file. Nadine watched the tight line of Karen's lips and the slight tension in her jaw. Everything on the paper was correct. Ellis, Ellis, Ellis. Seats 1A, 1B, 1C. "Everything appears in order," Karen said, but her eyes never left Nadine's face. "However, our system flagged an inconsistency. Could you please move to seats 19B, 19C, and 19D while we double-check your booking?" She kept her tone polite, yet it felt like an accusation. Eli's eyes widened. "Grandma, did I do something wrong?" His tiny voice trembled. Nadine tightened her arm around him. She looked at Karen. No compassion, no apology. Just the silent insistence that these seats didn't belong to them. Charles straightened, his silence as loud as a shout. He placed a steady hand on Nadine's shoulder. Nadine felt the quiet strength of 35 years of marriage. But she didn't let Charles intervene. She lowered her voice to Eli. "Not now, sweetheart," she whispered. "Just trust me." Eli nodded, trusting her calm more than the world around him. Nadine stood, gathered their belongings, and followed Charles down the aisle. Each step was deliberate and dignified, though her chest ached with the weight of that silent slight. As they passed other passengers, some curious, most indifferent, Nadine reminded herself why she chose restraint. She would answer this insult, but on her own terms, with every ounce of the quiet power she had built over a lifetime. When Karen Whitlow returned, her posture was as crisp as her uniform. She hovered by their row, clipboard in hand, and spoke with clinical politeness. "I'm afraid there's still an issue with your booking. Please proceed to seats 19B through 19D while we conduct a full verification." She didn't apologize, she didn't soften her tone. Just that exacting professionalism. Nadine slid Eli off her lap and stood, gathering their belongings with deliberate calm. Eli's face scrunched in confusion as he followed her lead. Charles rose too, eyes locked straight ahead. Nadine leaned down, brushing Eli's cheek. "Hey, buddy," she murmured. "Sometimes people make mistakes." "We'll be right back." But Eli's bottom lip quivered. "Grandma, where's my button?" he whispered, pointing at the row of plush seats they were leaving. Nadine gently patted his hand. "It'll come back soon, I promise." They moved down the aisle in silent dignity. The cabin's soft lighting and hushed murmurs stood in stark contrast to the storm inside Nadine's chest, an ache of injustice sharper than any chemotherapy sting her grandson had faced. A handful of first-class passengers glanced up. Some whispered, others looked away. No one stood to protest. Nadine felt each silent glance like a weight on her shoulders, but she straightened, lifted her chin, and focused on Eli's small hand in hers. In economy, the seats were tighter, the lights brighter, and the air warmer with recycled breaths. Nadine guided Eli into 19B and helped him buckle in. Charles took 19C. A junior flight attendant appeared, eyes apologetic, handing Eli a juice box. Nadine offered a polite nod of thanks, her expression composed though her heart raced. This wasn't how a grandmother should feel, relegated because of skin and circumstance. Yet she held her anger in check, feeling the hard edges of resolve forming. As she settled into her new seat, Nadine closed her eyes for a moment and pictured the bright halls of the pediatric oncology ward she funded. Each seat she gave up now would determine whether those children received their next treatment on time. Her silent vow crystallized. This slight would not go unanswered. When the time was right, she would remind this airline exactly whose life they were toying with. And she would do it the only way she knew, with quiet force, so powerful it could not be ignored. Nadine settled into the cramped economy row and waited for the junior attendant's back to turn. Eli fidgeted beside her, tracing the stitching on his juice-stained tray table. Without a word, Nadine slipped her smartphone from her coat pocket and opened the MedBridge Secure app. An icon of a golden cross on a black background. Her thumb hovered for a heartbeat over the Suspend Funding Chain button. With a single tap, the screens in boardrooms from New York to Nashville lit up red. MedBridge Allocation A17 paused. Instantly, finance directors, hospital administrators, and airport executives saw the alert. 17 pediatric oncology units would lose their lifeline if this order stood. Nadine placed the phone back in her lap as Eli looked up, puzzled. A ripple of messages flew through Nexair's command center. The CFO's phone buzzed relentlessly. "This is Dr. Ellis. Confirmed suspension of $280 million, 0 cents in airport clinic grants." Within seconds, the airline's chief financial officer sent a terse memo. "Effective immediately, halt all disbursements to MedBridge partnered facilities." Then came the board's auto-escalation. Level 1 crisis, executive intervention required. Back in the cabin, flight attendants exchanged uneasy glances. Overhead, the PA system crackled to life with a discreet hum crackle that only crew recognized. Protocol Aurora. Initiate compliance. A second attendant approached Nadine's row, voice low and urgent. "Dr. Ellis, we've been instructed to inform you that your original seats are available again. The captain requests your return to first class." Eli's eyes widened. "Grandma? Does this mean I get my button back?" Nadine roused herself from the hush of her own thoughts. She smiled gently and ruffled his hair. "Yes, sweetheart. Come on." She stood and offered her arm to Charles. Each step back up the aisle felt lighter than the one down. The engine's hum now sounded like a muted victory. As they reached row 1, Nadine paused. She glanced at the other passengers, at the overwhelmed flight attendants, at the hushed crew. Her chest swelled with a quiet triumph, not for herself, but for every child who depend on MedBridge funds next week. She would reclaim her seat, but more importantly, she had reclaimed their respect and the heartbeat of hospital wards across the country. Down in Nexair's corporate operations center, the usual hum of servers gave way to blaring alarms. Monitors that tracked revenue flows, passenger loads, and in-flight catering now flashed bright red. Medbridge allocation A17, suspend. Aspen Harper, the airline's CFO, stared in disbelief. Her phone buzzed non-stop with texts and emails. Dr. Ellis has paused $280 million, 0 cents, in pediatric oncology grants. She jammed out a terse memo to the board. Level 1 crisis. Immediate executive intervention required. Moments later, the boardroom door burst open. CEO Robert Caldwell strode in, face pale under the fluorescent lights. "What happened?" he demanded. Before anyone could answer, his phone chimed. He swiped the screen and listened, eyes widening. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, then tapped the intercom. "To Captain Rivers on Flight 742. This is Robert Caldwell. You must invite Dr. Nadine Ellis back to her original seats in first class, immediately. Issue a public apology on behalf of Nexair. Understood?" In the cabin, the code word Protocol Aurora had already sounded in the flight attendant headset. Junior crew members exchanged relieved glances. Back in the operations center, controllers watched as the system automatically reactivated funding lines. Hospital administrators exhaled in relief, and pediatric wards nationwide prepared to proceed with scheduled treatments. Caldwell turned to Aspen. "Get me the entire executive team in 20 minutes. We're drafting a public statement. And find out how we ever let this happen." His voice was calm but icy. "Someone in customer experience will need to answer for this. And they'll need to explain in front of the media why we kicked out a woman who keeps our partner airports running." Up in the cockpit, Captain Rivers's console lit with the CO's directive. He cleared his throat to the first officer and pressed the cabin pay button. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to apologize for the earlier inconvenience regarding seat assignments. Dr. Nadine Ellis will be returning to first class. I ask you to please join me in welcoming her back." His tone was formal, but he hesitated, as if aware that the apology carried the weight of lives and livelihoods far beyond these walls. Back at her seat, Nadine felt the shift. An unseen force had tilted the balance. She watched the cabin doors swing open, the crew lined up in respect. The world below had finally realized who she was, and what she meant to so many. The cabin lights were back to their soft glow when the intercom crackled to life. "Attention all crew," the captain's voice came over the PA. "This is Captain Rivers. By order of Nexair headquarters, please invite Dr. Nadine Ellis to return to her first-class seats. A public apology is to be issued upon her arrival." A hush fell. Nadine glanced at Eli, who clutched his toy airplane and peered up at her with wide eyes. Charles gave her a small nod, wordless encouragement in his steady gaze. Nadine took a breath, smoothing the front of her simple black coat, and rose from 19B. The junior flight attendant who had escorted them down the aisle caught her eye. Flushing, she stepped forward and lowered her voice to a respectful whisper. "Dr. Ellis, the captain requests your return to first-class seats, 1A, 1B, and 1C. He also asked me to apologize for the earlier inconvenience." Her apology trembled between them like fragile china. Nadine offered a gracious smile. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice calm but carrying the weight of every child who depended on Medbridge grants. Eli let go of her hand and skipped ahead, eager for the button on his seat to guide him back to comfort. As Nadine followed Charles up the aisle, passengers turned. Some rubbed their eyes in disbelief, others offered nods of respect. The soft hum of the engines felt like a muted victory anthem. She met Karen Whitlow's gaze across the cabin. No words were exchanged, but the significance rippled through the air. Reaching row 1, Nadine paused. The cabin crew formed a respectful semicircle around her seat. Captain Rivers himself stood there, hands folded, a solemn expression on his face. "Dr. Ellis," he began, "on behalf of Nexair, I sincerely apologize for the error and any distress caused." Nadine inclined her head. "Thank you, Captain," she replied. "I appreciate the apology." She turned and looked at the other passengers, offering a gentle smile that acknowledged their solidarity. Then she settled into 1A, buckling Eli into 1C with practiced ease. As her seatbelt clicked into place, Nadine let herself breathe. In that moment, the cabin felt transformed. A space where respect outweighed prejudice, and a quiet act of reclaiming dignity resonated louder than any words. She touched Charles's hand and whispered, "Let's go home." Eli pressed the seat button and laughed as the footrest rose. Nadine watched him, heart full. This was about more than a seat. It was proof that even a single, silent command could shift an entire system and protect the lives of the children who needed her most. The cabin fell utterly silent as the cockpit doors slid open. Captain Rivers stepped out, crisp in his uniform, his polished wingpin catching the soft, first-class lighting. He paused in the aisle's center, then cleared his throat. Passengers turned, leaning forward in their seats. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice steady but carrying gravity. "On behalf of Nexair, I offer my deepest apologies to Dr. Nadine Ellis and her family for the earlier seat reassignment. That action was unwarranted and contrary to our standards. Dr. Ellis, we welcome you back to your original seats." Time seemed to pause. A woman in 2B dropped her glass. It tinkled softly against the tray table. A silver-hailed man in 1D whispered to his neighbor, "Nadine Ellis. That's the Medbridge founder." A murmur rippled through the cabin as the reality settled in. Nadine sat perfectly still in 1A, her posture unshaken. Charles tightened his grip on her hand before releasing it and standing to let her pass. Eli's mouth formed a small O of surprise, clutching his toy plane as though it too was witnessing history. Behind them, at the galley entrance, Karen Whitlow froze. Her clipboard slipped from her fingers and clattered against the stainless steel counter. She looked ashen, eyes wide, lips parted, and did not move. Other flight attendants exchanged glances of relief and awkward sympathy. As Captain Rivers stepped back, a junior attendant knelt at Nadine's side. "Dr. Ellis, your seats are ready," she said softly. Nadine inclined her head, offering a serene nod rather than a smile. She rose with measured grace, her black coat sweeping the aisle carpet. Each footstep echoed in the hush. Passengers watched, riveted. A businessman in 3C sat forward, phone raised discreetly. 2 rows back, a mother whispered, "I can't believe how they treated her." No one interrupted. Everyone bore witness. Nadine reached 1A and paused, turning to face the cabin. She let her gaze settle on Karen for a heartbeat. No anger, only quiet authority. Then looked ahead. The junior attendant guided her into the seat. Eli hopped back into 1C, pressing his button as the footrest rose at his delighted giggle. Nadine buckled in, met Charles's eyes, and inclined her head once to the captain, who offered a respectful bow in return. In that single act of contrition, public, formal, and in full view, Nexair had acknowledged her dignity, and the cabin, unified in that moment, felt the power of a quiet apology that spoke louder than any argument. After Nadine clicked her seatbelt into place, a soft chime on her phone signaled that Medbridge funding had been fully restored. In pediatric wards across 17 airports, clinicians exhaled collectively. Treatment schedules would proceed, medications refilled, children's lives uninterrupted. Nadine felt a quiet swell of relief. This was the real victory. Behind her, at the galley entrance, Karen Whitlow stood alone. Captain Rivers's voice crackled through the attendant headset. "Lead flight attendant, please report to the cockpit immediately." There was no panic in his tone, only measured authority. Karen straightened her uniform and followed the aisle, clipboard in hand, toward the cockpit door. A few steps from Nadine's row, Karen paused. Her shoulders slumped imperceptibly. The junior attendant who had escorted Nadine earlier hovered nearby, eyes downcast. No one offered encouragement. The cabin's atmosphere was thick with unspoken judgment. In the cockpit vestibule, Karen met the captain's gaze. Crystal clear overhead lights revealed the cancellation order on his tablet. Immediate suspension pending internal review. He didn't need to shout. "Karen, effective now. You are relieved of all flight duties. You will remain in your seat for the remainder of the flight. Further instructions will follow." Karen swallowed. "Understood, Captain," she whispered. She turned to return to the galley, but the crew parted and then closed ranks behind her. No co-worker met her eye. As she passed, they gave her the distance they would a storm-tossed ship. Her footsteps echoed in the aisle until she reached the back. Nadine caught a glimpse of Karen's reflection in the galley's stainless steel. Stunned, isolated, she felt no pleasure in that glassy gaze, only a calm affirmation that justice need not be loud to be absolute. The cabin settled into a respectful quiet. Passengers shifted, aware that the person they had once overlooked now stood alone, and that a grandmother's silent command had reshaped more than just seat assignments. It had reshaped hearts. Nadine rested her hand on the polished armrest. She thought of Eli's smile, the ward nurses preparing for tomorrow's rounds, and the power of one restrained action. No haughty words, no public spectacle, just the hush of a system realigning itself under the weight of integrity and compassion. And in that hush, Nadine found her most resonant triumph. By the time Flight 742 touched down at Dulles, the story had exploded across every newsroom. As Nadine, Charles, and Eli stepped off the plane, their phones buzzed in unison. A Medbridge press release pulsed on screens everywhere. Effective today, Medbridge Foundation is suspending $280 million, 0 cents, in pediatric oncology funding to NextAir partnered facilities unless NextAir's leadership publicly acknowledges and remediates implicit bias in their service. We demand full transparency and mandatory unconscious bias training for all staff. In hospitals from Phoenix to Boston, ward managers paused mid-chartering. Nurses exchanged wary glances as family members of young patients received the notice. Local news tickers warned that life-saving treatments for dozens of children could be delayed. The emotional gravity was unmistakable. This was no corporate spat. It was a matter of children's lives. At NextAir headquarters in Arlington, the executive boardroom erupted. CEO Robert Caldwell marched to the podium, face grave beneath the company logo. Flashbulbs burst as reporters leaned in. "On behalf of NextAir," he began, voice steady, "we acknowledge that a fundamental error occurred on Flight 742. Our lead flight attendant's actions were unacceptable and violated our core values." He paused, scanning the crowd. "Today, we commit to a comprehensive reform. All frontline staff will undergo unconscious bias and diversity training by independent experts within 30 days. We will publish quarterly progress reports, invite third-party oversight, and issue a public apology to Dr. Nadine Ellis and every passenger who felt disrespected." Back at Dulles, Nadine watched the live feed on her phone as Charles guided Eli toward ground transportation. She felt a quiet relief, tempered by the knowledge of how many lives depended on that apology. The CEO's words were more than lip service. They were a promise to hospitals, parents, and children counting on Medbridge grants. That evening, local headlines blared, $280. 0 cents. M cancer funding suspended over airline bias. Next Air CO vows bias training after CEO's family kicked from first class. In living rooms across the country, viewers saw Robert Caldwell's remorseful expression and Dr. Ellis's calm dignity. For Medbridge's young patients, it meant treatment schedules could proceed. For NextAir employees, it signaled that respect transcended class or cabin. As Nadine tucked Eli into the car seat, he yawned and asked, "Grandma, can I have a cookie now?" She smiled, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "Yes, sweetheart. Everything's going to be all right." In that simple moment, the most powerful statement had already been made. True change comes not from outrage, but from the steady insistence that every life matters. A month later, Phoenix Sky Harbor felt different. Passengers heading for the first-class lounge paused beneath a new billboard that loomed over the terminal entrance. A color photograph of Nadine Ellis in a simple black coat, her silver hair framing a steady gaze as she held Eli's hand. Beneath her image, in clean white type against a deep teal background, the slogan read, "Respect isn't a class, it's a right." Travelers slowed, tilting their heads to read the fine print. Medbridge Foundation collaborates with leading airlines to ensure every passenger, regardless of seat, receives dignity and fairness. Join us in redefining service. A cluster of seniors studying the sign exchanged nods. One woman tapped her companion's shoulder and murmured, "That's the lady who paused $280 million 0 cents in funding, right?" Across the terminal, a teenager scrolled through social media on her phone, sharing a photo of the billboard with the hashtag "Respect is Right." Influencers and local news anchors quoted it in segments about how one grandma changed an industry. Inside NextAir's headquarters, CEO Robert Caldwell monitored web traffic. His team reported that click rates on the billboard campaign had surpassed any prior marketing push by 40%. More importantly, sentiment analysis showed a 75% positive shift in customer feedback around fair treatment and inclusive service. Three rival carriers, Silverwing Air, Continental Star, and HarborLink, issued statements committing to unconscious bias training and independent audits of cabin protocols. In Washington, D.C., hospital administrators at Medbridge clinics smiled when they saw the billboard's image in airport lounges. They'd already begun enrolling patients in the next round of clinical trials, secure in the knowledge that funding was stable. Parents of young cancer patients shared messages of gratitude. "Dr. Ellis not only fights for my child's life, but for our dignity," one post read. Back at Bethesda, Nadine drove through her leafy neighborhood, listening to a radio news segment featuring her quote, "True service isn't measured by seat assignments, it's measured by the humanity we extend to each other." She glanced at Charles in the passenger seat. He nodded with a quiet pride. Eli sat in the back, leafing through a picture book he'd received on his flight. That evening, Nadine slipped onto her porch swing, fingers wrapped around a cool glass of iced tea. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in gentle golds. She closed her eyes and listened to the distant hum of planes overhead. Once a source of tension, now a reminder of what could change when someone refused to be silenced. In the hush of twilight, she felt something settle in her chest, a soft, enduring glow of hope. The system had tilted the right way, not because of loud protests, but because one woman quietly demanded respect and made an entire industry answer. Weeks later, Nadine and Eli found themselves back at Phoenix Sky Harbor, this time as completely ordinary passengers. There was no red carpet, no television crews, just the familiar hum of luggage wheels and distant boarding announcements. Dr. Ellis carried her black tote as always. Eli clutched his toy airplane, the same one he'd held during that tense flight. They presented their first-class boarding passes and strolled down the jet bridge with calm confidence. As they stepped into the cabin, a young flight attendant approached them with a genuine smile, tray in hand. "Good morning, Dr. Ellis. Welcome back aboard. Would you and your grandson like a glass of orange juice or perhaps a hot chocolate?" Eli beamed. "Hot chocolate, please." The attendant nodded and pressed a button on her cart. The warm aroma of cocoa filled the air. Nadine settled into 1A, buckling in with the ease of someone who knew these seats were rightfully hers. Eli hopped into 1C, already pressing the seat controls to raise the footrest. Across the aisle, passengers chatted quietly, but their eyes landed on Nadine with friendly acknowledgement rather than curiosity or doubt. No one wondered who she was. They simply treated her like any respected first-class traveler. The junior attendant returned with 2 steaming mugs and placed them on the fold-out trays. "Here you go," she said softly. "Thank you for flying with us." As the plane taxied, Nadine watched Eli swirl his chocolate, his eyes bright with delight. She thought of the pediatric wards, how treatment schedules had kept pace, how families had been spared additional worry. The toy airplane in his hand was more than a plaything. It was a symbol of journeys enabled, not hindered. Overhead, a new poster adorned the cabin wall. "Every passenger matters." Below it, a small logo for the MedBridge Foundation signaled the ongoing partnership that ensured every child's treatment could happen on time. Nadine felt a gentle surge of satisfaction. This was the kind of legacy she'd hoped for. Silent, unassuming, yet profoundly impactful. Eli looked up and grinned. "Grandma, this seat even has a massage button now." Nadine laughed and reached over to press it. The chair hummed to life, comforting them both. "Yes, sweetie," she said. "Things have changed." The engine spooled and the cabin lights dimmed for takeoff. Nadine leaned back, eyes on the window, and breathed in the moment. No applause, no headlines. Just simple, dignified respect. In that quiet dignity, she recognized her true victory. A system realigned not by anger or spectacle, but by the unwavering insistence that every life and every seat deserves respect.